Hey guys, so I usually make tier list videos using data from YGeoScope.com for dueling book data as well as YCS topping information, but YGeoScope seems to be down for the next little while, so I figured I'd do the tier list the more traditional way, and if you guys are interested, I can always make a tier list by the data video again once YGeoScope is back up and running and that dueling book data is available, and so I can compare that to how I did today and see how close I am. But anyways, let's just get right into the tier list. So we do have tier 0 here, but of course, fortunately and maybe slash unfortunately for some people who think that way, we are no longer in a tier 0 format, although we were kind of close with Kashtira this time around. And so speaking of Kashtira, that of course is the best deck. I think while people figured it was the best deck for this format, some might have been a little surprised by how much representation it had in Top Cut. It really dominated this time around, despite everyone saying, oh, you know, Nibiru or any other board breaker breaks this deck. But you know what? It's actually quite versatile, and it's shown that it's really able to adapt and just a really strong deck. Another one, I guess, second is Sprite. Initially, this was a bit, I wouldn't say struggling, but wasn't getting as many tops at the beginning of the format with the new ban list, but now it's really come to show that it's still a very strong deck. In fact, it won YCS, one of the 3 YCS events the past weekend, and also just getting a lot of top cut representation, and you're seeing for example, the Melfi cards that Ding Kang Pham had showcased a bit earlier, and there's some other ways to play Sprite too, and so it's shown to be very resilient, very consistent, and just you know, it's a deck that can play a lot of hand traps, for example, so it's very flexible. Another deck, Branded Despia, which was for this coming into the event and certainly at the start of the format was considered to be one of the best decks. I'm gonna put this at the beginning of tier 2 now. Its representation has become it has gone down quite a bit since the beginning. For example, with the YCS Vegas, which was a 3v3 event, which did have a lot of representation, but it's certainly gone down since. It's still a very strong deck, don't get me wrong, and in May post Cyberstorm Access, you know, it's certainly going to be probably one of the better decks too. And it's a deck that I'm personally been playing a lot lately. It's really fun to play, but admittedly, yes, Ash can have a very big detrimental effect on this deck, and so, you know, you have decks like Kashtira Sprite, which can play a lot of hand traps, as well as Nichiria, for example. Well, I guess Nichiria Runa cannot really play that many hand traps, but regardless, every other deck is, if they're playing hand traps, they're all going to play Ash, and it's very strong against Branded. So I'm going to put it at tier 2 for now, but feel free to disagree. Another tier 2 deck, you know what? I'm going to put Drytron here too. It actually did get some YCS tops. Finally, I think it was long overdue considering the ban list, and it was really brought back, especially with Ashiza tiers sort of out of the mix now, with and also Bestials as well, which is why this deck really completely fell off. But you know, you do have Ben 10 back to 3, while the orange is still at 1. You know, this deck is still quite strong, and Vanity's Ruler, if they're playing it, you know, it's also quite a strong card. So I think it's cool to see that this deck has been able to come back, although me personally, I never really like playing against Drytron. Speaking of tier 2 Math Mech, I'm gonna put it also higher than Drytron. This deck, I definitely had a lot of high hopes for this deck coming into this format. You know, again, this is another deck with Bestials and Ishizu cards that was really hampering its core strategy. It's a really strong deck. This deck actually has a good matchup against Sprite. It can sort of clear those bodies on the field, which Sprite really needs, and certainly a deck that I really respect. And Math Mech is also another deck that can play a ton of hand traps, and so even if it loses that roll and goes second, it has a really strong chance of still being able to pull out the win. So you know what, it's a really good deck. It's seeing those YCS tops. It's also been seeing a lot of regional tops prior to this weekend's YCS, and so now it's really showing that it does have a very strong potential. So next, let's go with Flunder. I'm also going to put it at tier 2. Maybe it's sort of like near the bottom of tier 2, but it's still getting like at least one YCS top, at least like the last couple of events now. You know, it did lose Wind Barrier statue, but it's shown that it's quite grindy. It's able to hang on. You know, you do still have some other strong cards. Admittedly, D-Shifter is nowhere near as strong as it was last format when tier limits were tier 0, but you know what, Flunder is still very strong. Normal summon Robina, pretty good start, and so yeah, I'm gonna put it here, but you know, it's a very good anti-meta strategy. Maybe we'll tackle, actually Labyrinth is a good one to tackle. This has fallen quite a bit lately as well. Initially, it was definitely tier 1 for sure. Certainly, you saw those results at YCS Vegas, and you were also seeing a lot of online play with this deck as well among top ranked players that you would know if you also watch my meta snapshot videos. So I'm also gonna put this in tier 2 now. I think it's certainly dropped off quite a bit since the last couple YCS events as well. It's still a strong deck. I think trap decks, and you're gonna also kind of see a similar trend with trap tricks. When trap decks are kind of like meta, it can get kind of hard for them. Because when it comes to siding, back row decks, it's the most straightforward to side in terms of you just have those generic back row cards, and that's what you need to draw. Whereas there are certain other meta strategies where sometimes they might have some back row, but they might have more monster heavy kind of interruptions. It really depends on what they draw, for example, and it can get very hard to side against decks like that. Like a very prime extreme example is something like, let's say, like Synchro Eldritch, right, where you have some back row, you also have some monster interruptions, and you have no idea which one it's going to be, and it's very, very difficult to decide. And that's how I felt with like Phantom Knights as well when they were tier 1 like a little over a year ago. And so but when it comes to back row decks, it's just always very straightforward when it comes to what to side, and so it can get a little hard for them to keep at its top position. So let's go on to I guess Plunder Patrol. This is kind of hard. It's definitely got YCS tops now, back-to-back YCS events. I think just one, but it's still very, very strong. Maybe we'll put it near beginning of Rogue for now, only because while it is a good deck, I think representation-wise in terms of actual play, whether online on Dueling Book or IRL Life, most likely, it doesn't see as much play. Of course, it's still a very good deck and a very fun one at that with the interesting gimmick, but I think purely from just that kind of representation alone, I'll put it at Rogue. But really seeing success, I know at Peru is with the runic variant with Plunder Patrol traditionally, or not traditionally, but a lot of times it was played with the adventure token package instead. Certainly let me know which way you prefer. I'm not sure which one is best, but certainly both options seem to be viable. So Marincess, this is also a very good deck. It's gone multiple YCS tops now, I think back to back now. I know Shannon was one of the ones that did both times. So certainly, again, a really good deck. This deck sees a pretty decent amount of play on Dueling Book as well, but at the same time, still not really all that enough, so that I'll still put it in Rogue for now, but I think you could argue tier 2 as well. It's obviously getting YCS tops, which is very, very cool to see a deck like Marincess that was Rogue and sort of even below Rogue for quite some time, but now it's really starting to show that it's capable of doing well at competitive events. And so another one, that's interesting is For Hire Runic. I'll put it at Rogue because I don't believe it topped the YCS, at least among the data that was kind of public available. I mean, of course, at least for London, they had like 13% in other category in the top 64, which I don't think was really fully well known. So maybe For Hire was in one of them. But online on Dueling Book, it's actually seeing a pretty good amount of play. I think with the runic cards on top of the For Hire cards, you're basically drawing like 12 cards in like 2 turns. It's really, really crazy. The runic cards are just absolutely nuts on their own. But For Hire, you know what? You really can't sleep on them. I think I'll just put them in Rogue for now, but who knows? Maybe they'll start topping more events moving forward. We have Eldritch. I'm going to put this in Other. I get it. It did top YCS Peru, though, so that's certainly, which is why I at least put this deck as one of the decks to put in this tier list. There's obviously a ton of other decks that are not even in this conversation right now. But Eldritch, it's, again, with the trap decks sort of seem to going down in terms of play and success. I think Eldritch probably has also gone down since then as well. But you know what? It was really actually cool for me to see Eldritch do well. I know a lot of people hate Eldritch. I personally really liked it, actually. I played it like last summer as well, and I really actually enjoyed it, despite me originally telling myself that I hate trap decks, but I kind of come to like it. Punk, we're going to put this in Rogue as well. I'm not quite sure. I guess I'll put it above For Hire because this one actually was getting YCS tops, although not too many, but still very, very good. Really, really strong deck. It can still be used as sort of like a package in a way, although it's a much bigger package than what it used to be now that Chaos Ruler is banned, but it's still a very, very cool strategy. Lots of synchro summoning. You are burning yourself a lot of life points, but still, you know what? You can make some pretty good boards, and Psychic and Punisher also is kind of hard to out for a lot of decks as well. So really cool rogue synchro strategy if you're into that kind of game plan. Silent Mangrate, I also want to put this in Rogue. I'm going to put it just at top of Other for now. This also had, maybe I'll consider this again after I sort of put all the other decks. Salamangre, it's again, it did top YCS Peru as well. I'm not sure about the most recent one. Again, it might have been in that other category, who knows. But with the adventure stuff, it seems like that's sort of like the most competitive way. I've also seen multiple players on Dueling Book who are high rated with Salamangre using the adventure token package. You know, it's a really consistent deck, very link heavy, so it doesn't care about D-Barrier really. Can also make like turbo, like Baguska, like rank 4 plays, which was really good. Well, not really. It was good in the sense that it could make, for example, Abyss Dweller in last format in tiers, but it was bad in the sense that tier length, strategy really hampered what Salamangre was trying to do with, a lot of grave stuff happening. So, you know what, I'm gonna put it in other for now. Certainly I don't want to offend those Sala players. I know they're quite loyal. I do think it's a good deck though, and especially if you're just starting out Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, or returning to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, it's always like kind of like a default good option to play, especially because it is for the most part pretty affordable. Dark World, you know what, I'm gonna put this top of Rogue, or maybe I'll consider tier 2. I think I'll put it in Rogue for now. It didn't seem to have topped YCS this past weekend. It did have some, I believe, release in Peru, and it was getting a pretty good amount of regional tops actually. So you definitely can't discount them, and it's been getting it's still popular online on Dueling Book as well. Despite the initial release of the structured decks, I thought that's why it was so popular. But even well after that, now that tier format is over, Dark World is getting a lot of play, and it's it's if you let them go first and you don't have any hand traps, it's pretty strong. And I think you're seeing also people like, especially Sprite players, for example, their main deck in Droll, because not only is it good against that runic matchup, which is insane, and they draw a lot, against Dark World it can really just end it for them. Otherwise they're just going to be comboing for like 15-20 minutes, and then you're just either going to get FTK'd or pretty much borderline FTK'd on your turn. So you know what, I'll still put it at Rogue for now, but it is certainly up there, and I'm also putting it kind of high up in that Rogue category because it's seeing a lot of play online. Speaking of Runic, let's actually get back to tier 1, which is Naturia Runic. This deck definitely, I think, is in the top 3 right now. It's such a strong deck. The Runic cards on them, like, it's just, even something like when you get, let's say, like Gimmick Puppet by Branded, like the Runic cards really help you play through that on your turn, your opponent's turn. It's really insane. And then the Naturia stuff, of course, like something like Nappies, really crazy against a lot of strategies, most especially Branded. If you can't use spells, how are you going to play? And then also they have Barkin as well for other interruptions. So, it's a really strong deck that can also make Barone, for example. Again, kind of like a synchro strategy, something that if you're interested in that, this is definitely one of the best ones to go with. And I think this deck on its own with Naturia just made it so that the Naturia, or rather the Runic cards, are now going to be on that ban list radar, like Fountain or maybe Tip. I think something might have to get hit, especially now with something like, let's say, like Runic for hire. Like, it's just a lot of recursion and a lot of drawing. Runic Sprite, of course, has always been a meta strategy as well, although lately Sprite seems to be going away from that and just either playing, with Adventure Token or just pure, and some Melfi cards, of course. And then we're going to move on to Tri-Brigade, and we're going to put this also in Rogue. I believe a Tri-Brigade variant topped, at least at one YCS top this past weekend. And so, that's really cool to see. Obviously, when the format first started, people assumed that this deck would be pretty bad, right? And struggle because of Kashira banishing everything. But you know what? Decks always find a way to mitigate and adapt. And so clearly, Tri-Brigade has shown that it's able to be still successful in a competitive format. With most notably, for example, with Sprite, it goes quite well. Obviously, with the ban of Elf, that really hampered things. But you know what? I think Tri-Brigade players, there's a lot of you out there, and you're probably really enjoying the fact that it was able to top a YCS. And then similarly, Scareclaw is another deck that recently got at least one YCS top this past weekend. Another really interesting deck. Its whole gimmick of like, defense position thing, I think that's pretty cool. And their Link 4 is honestly quite strong, where essentially, it'll turn everything to defense mode, and they can't, it's unaffected by like those activate effects. And so, you know what, it's kind of like a giant Baguska, really. Although, unfortunately, with the evenly match being played so much in this format, that card can be pretty detrimental to this deck's end board as well. But you know what, I think it's really cool to see that it was also able to top. And then we have Dino. I'm definitely putting this in the other section for now. But you know what, Dino players, you're getting some new support soon. So who knows, maybe even Misk comes to 2 or something. Who knows? I think for now, it's fair to say that, it hasn't had any YCS tops in quite some time, so it's fair to put them in other, but your time may come very soon with the new support. Sword Soul, this is an interesting one. So we'll put this bottom of tier 2, but it's certainly gone down a lot in terms of competitive success, in terms of YCS top cut representation, it still had a YCS top at least this past weekend. Had a bit more, of course, at the beginning of the format, and it's sort of slowly started to decrease, kind of like Labyrinth. I think it's a very consistent deck. That's what it's always been known for. But you know what? The board breakers that you're putting in against something like Kashtira sort of indirectly also hits Sword Soul as well. They do need their bodies on board, and also something like D-Barrier for Branded also hits them too with synchro strategy. So you know what? It's still a very solid deck. If you watch my sort of cost breakdown of the top decks, Sword Soul is definitely one of the more cost efficient ones. So something to consider if you're looking into competitive play. Next, we have Rika, and I'm really confident in this deck. I think it's really cool to see that it's getting a lot of YCS success now this past weekend, and of course, you know, in regionals prior to that. And before tier format, this deck was also seeing success, right? It did win Euros after all with Marcus Patel. So I think it's really good strategy. It's very combo heavy, certainly requires a good pilot to play it well. It does have a good sprite matchup in my view, because it can like tribute off bodies or steal bodies that sprite really needs to combo off. So that's really good. The downside is that its weaknesses has been sort of always evenly matched, because you know something like Dark Ruler, this deck doesn't care too much, but evenly matched definitely hurts. And in a format where a lot of people, almost every list is, you know, at least siding it or sometimes even main decking it, that can be a bit of a challenge. But despite that, clearly it's shown that it's able to do well competitively, so another deck to consider there. Sky Striker, this of course, you know what, I'm going to put this in Rogue. It actually did get a YCS top, I believe, this past weekend. So, you know, it's always going to see a lot of play regardless of the format, regardless of how actually good it might be in whatever format you're in, because it just has a lot of fan base. People really love Sky Striker. It's a very high skill ceiling deck in terms of being able to actually do well with it. It is a going second deck, so among, you know, in this kind of day and age, going second is pretty difficult, but Sky Striker can still kind of pull it off as well. And you have some powerhouse new cards like Thrust that can help you get access into Engage or any other you know, board clear spell trap cards that you can use. So certainly there, I think it's fair to put it in Rogue, and maybe it climbs back up to at least tier 2 again sometime. You know, it seems to always go back and forth depending on the format. So definitely never give up on Sky Striker. Tier Elements, this is a cool one. I think for now, let's put this in Rogue. I think it's a really cool, really strong deck. We'll actually put it pretty high. I think it's still a very strong deck. Of course, it's a very big brain deck, and at least in last format, it did pay off because, you know, it was by far the best deck compared to other decks. But now, it's not like that, and it still does require a really good pilot to do well. But you did see that in the YCS live stream, for example. And so, you know, it's the way it plays and the deck list has changed quite a bit since the last format, of course, with the Ishizu cards gone and all the names being put to one. But you know what, if you're into fusion strategies, this is certainly a good one to consider, and you can still use like Tier Elements as like a package and something like Branded too if you want to play it that way. Trap Tricks, that's another deck that's also seeing a lot of decline in play since the last month even, for example. It was seeing a lot with that initial structure deck release. Aside from that hype, it's still a good deck, right? And it was seeing it at least topped had one YCS top in Peru. I was getting like regional tops as well for sure. But you know what? Unfortunately, I think with like similarly you're seeing with like Labyrinth, like the Trap decks are kind of declining in play in terms of success as well. And Trap decks is a little different too, especially like going second, it can struggle quite a bit because unlike Labyrinth where it can just set 5 and you can still win that way, you know, Trap decks isn't purely just a back row deck, right? Like it has a lot of combo elements to it, and it does need to sort of, you know, do their monster lineup play to make this deck actually function properly, and going second can get really hard with this strategy. So I think that's one of the main reasons why it's kind of struggling. But of course, in terms of budget perspective, it's definitely the most cost efficient one. If you just want to get started in competitive play, you have those structure decks that gets you most of that deck list, and it's really good to go off the bat. So certainly something to consider for new and returning players. And then we're going to put Hero. We'll put this in other. I mean, MBT was actually doing very well with this at YCS. So you know what? It's always been a very solid rogue choice, combo oriented. It's always getting new support, and you know what, something like Dark Angel is actually pretty good in this format. You give it to something like Branded, but now they can't play resolve spells, you know, how are they going to win? And so it's really strong. It has some unique aspects to make it viable competitively and just like every format essentially. And so, you know, for something that's like an anime classic kind of deck, it's certainly the most competitively viable, right? You have decks like, let's say, Dark Magician or Blue Eyes or Cyber Dragons. You know, they're nowhere near as competitive as Heroes are. And so, you know, that's something that I think is really cool about the deck, and you're always going to get more support. So for you Hero players, I hope you're feeling lucky because, you know what, you're still in this. And lastly, we do have Dragon Link, and so I'm also gonna put this in other. It's a bit disappointing. I personally thought that, you know, it hasn't gotten any YCS tops, at least not in the recent one and over the weekend. I don't think, at least. Again, maybe it was in that other category, but you know what? I think for now we'll have it in another section, but you know, it's bound to move up in tiers as the format moves on. It's Konami always loves dragons. They give them a lot of support, so you know, it's probably going to do well, but right now not the best position. I mean, last format, at least, with it plays a lot of bestial, so it was a good countermeasure against tier elements, but not so much anymore. So but it's I still have hope for Dragon Link, or Bestial Dragon, however you want to call it, moving forward. I think it will come back to meta relevance pretty soon enough. And so that's it for the tier list. So hope you found that enjoyable, but again, if you are interested, I can always do another one by the data based on Dueling Book data once YGO is back online, and so we can compare it to how I did with this one. So anyways, thank you so much for watching, and take care, guys.